My name is Nate Caldwell, and the night my wife told me she was taking my stepdaughter to spend Christmas with her ex-husband, she slammed the kitchen door so hard the windows rattled, pointed a red polished finger at me, and said clear as day, "Zoe needs her real father. If you don't like it, divorce me." I didn't argue. I wiped grease off my hands, opened my old laptop at the kitchen table, and finally accepted the Japan transfer I'd been turning down for years. 1 week later, she came home screaming on my front porch, pounding on the door like she still owned the place. Back then, she really did think she owned everything. It didn't start with the screaming. It started like a regular gray Tuesday in Tacoma, Washington. Rain on the asphalt. Folks hunched in their coats, just trying to get through another December workday. The kind of Pacific Northwest drizzle that seeps into your bones and makes you forget what sunshine feels like. I'd put in a full shift at the aircraft parts plant, stayed late to recalibrate a gauge that wouldn't hold tolerance, and swung by Fred Meyer for milk and a rotisserie chicken. The parking lot was slick with rain and fallen leaves, and I could smell winter coming in the air. When I walked into the house, it smelled like cinnamon and pine. The little artificial tree in the corner was already lit, colored lights blinking in the front window. That was Zoe's touch. She was 12 and loved Christmas like it was a full-time job. The kind of kid who started planning decorations in October and knew exactly how many shopping days were left until the 25th. She came sliding into the hallway in sock feet, nearly colliding with me as I set down the grocery bag. "Dad, did you fix the jewelry box lid?" she asked, bouncing on her toes the way 12-year-olds do when they're excited about something. I held up the small wooden jewelry box I'd been working on in the garage. Beverly had found it beat up at a yard sale 3 weeks ago, the kind of find she was always proud of. "Look what I got for practically nothing," she'd said, holding up the damaged box with its broken hinge and scratched surface. I'd spent 3 evenings after work sanding and gluing it back together, replacing the tiny brass hinges with new ones from the hardware store. "Give it a try," I said, handing it to her. Zoe leaned on the little pink lid with both hands, testing the repair. It didn't budge. The hinge held solid, smooth as the day it was made. "Perfect," she said, grinning big enough to show the gap where her last baby tooth had been. "I told Mom you could fix anything. You always do." I wish that had been true. There are some things that can't be fixed with patience and the right tools, but I didn't know that yet. Back then, I still thought every problem had a solution if you just worked at it long enough. In the kitchen, Beverly stood at the stove with her back to me, stirring a pot of marinara sauce. Her shoulders were tight, pulled up toward. Her ears in that way that meant trouble. I'd learned over the years that you could read her mood just by how high they sat. Tonight, they were practically touching her earlobes. "Hey," I said, putting the milk in the fridge and unwrapping the chicken. "We got the Christmas bonus today, $2,400. It's not huge, but it'll cover that bike Zoe wants and then some. Maybe we could even swing a weekend at the coast after the holidays." She didn't look up. The wooden spoon kept moving in slow circles, scraping against the bottom of the pot. "We need to talk," she said. Those 4 words. In 12 years of marriage and relationships, I'd learned that those 4 words are never about anything good. They're the opening notes of a song you don't want to hear, the first drops of rain before a storm hits. "Okay," I said carefully, washing my hands at the sink. "About what?" She turned off the burner with more force than necessary, set the spoon down on the counter with a sharp click, and faced me. She had on a nice blouse I'd bought her for her birthday, coral-colored with little pearl buttons. Her lipstick was still perfect from work at the salon, not a smudge despite 8 hours of cutting and styling hair. It struck me, not for the first time, that she always dressed more carefully for other people than for a quiet night at home with family. "I talked to Dante," she said, the words coming out in a rush like she'd been rehearsing them all day. Dante, her ex-husband, Zoe's biological father, the man who showed up twice a year with expensive gifts and big promises, who missed birthdays and parent-teacher conferences, but always had a story about why. Work trips that couldn't be postponed, car trouble, a family emergency that never quite got explained. He was handsome in that easy, charming way that made people forgive him for things they shouldn't. "About what?" I asked, though my stomach had already started to knot. I knew that tone. I'd heard it before, usually followed by news that would turn our quiet life upside down. "About Christmas," she said, like it ought to be obvious, like I should have seen this coming. He invited us to his new cabin this year, Mount Rainier. He says he wants to make up for lost time with Zoe. She needs her real father in her life, Nate. She needs that connection. The words hit me like cold water. Real father. As if 5 years of bedtime stories and soccer practice and helping with math homework didn't count. As if being there for every fever and scraped knee and school play meant nothing because I didn't share her DNA. Beverly, we already have plans, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Church service on Christmas Eve, dinner at your parents' house, watching the Seahawks game. Zoe's been looking forward to it for weeks. She made that paper chain calendar specifically to count down to Christmas morning here. She cut me off with a little wave of her hand, dismissive and final. We have habits, she said. Not plans. You and your potluck dinners and folding chairs and church basements. Zoe deserves a real Christmas with a real cabin and a real tree that touches the ceiling and her real dad. She hit that word like a hammer driving a nail. Real. As if everything we'd built together was somehow artificial. I let that sink in for a second, the word real echoing in my head like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. I thought I was part of that, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. I'm the one here every day. I'm the one coaching her softball team, taking her to orthodontist appointments, showing up at school plays when she has 3 lines and a costume made from cardboard. Beverly's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. You're the stepfather, she said, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. Don't make this about you. You knew what you were signing up for when you married me. Dante is her actual father. She needs that bond, that connection. Maybe if you weren't so simple about everything, you'd understand what she's missing. Simple. The word stung more than I expected. Simple, like caring about small things was somehow beneath her. Simple, like showing up every day wasn't enough. Something small and quiet broke inside my chest. Not a dramatic snap like you see in movies. More like an old board finally giving way under too much weight. The kind of break that's been coming for a long time. And where do I fit in this perfect Christmas? I asked. She shrugged, and that casual gesture hurt worse than any shouting match we'd ever had. You don't. Not this time. We're going to the cabin for a week. We leave on the 23rd. If you can't handle that, you can file for divorce. Or I will. She said it like she was reading a line off a script she'd rehearsed all afternoon, practicing in the mirror at the salon between clients. From the living room, Zoe called, Mom, are we watching the Christmas movie tonight? The one with Jimmy Stewart? Beverly didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on me, waiting for the reaction she expected. The pleading, the arguing, the desperate attempts to change her mind that I'd given her so many times before. She was waiting for me to beg. This time, I just stood there. I thought about the email from Kobe sitting flagged in my inbox, the one I'd been ignoring for months. Final offer, quality inspector supervisor, Yamamoto Industries, Japan, good salary, housing allowance, a chance to start over. I'd turned them down 3 times because Beverly said she couldn't leave Washington, couldn't leave her salon with its steady clientele, couldn't leave her parents' house 10 minutes away, couldn't leave the life she'd built. I thought about my father, who'd worked 35 years at the same Boeing plant before they moved production overseas. He used to tell me, son, don't let anybody treat you like you're lucky just to be standing in their kitchen. A man's got to know his worth. I see, I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt, steadier than I had any right to be. When did you tell Zoe about this plan? Yesterday, after school. She's excited about it. She wants to see real snow, not this Seattle slush. Dante's picking us up in his new truck. Of course he was. Of course he had a new truck for the occasion. Okay, I said. I'll stay out of your way. Beverly blinked, thrown off balance. That wasn't the line she was expecting. She'd prepared for a fight, not surrender. That's it? She demanded, her voice rising. You're not going to yell at me, call me selfish, threaten to call a lawyer and make this difficult for everyone? I shook my head. No, I said. Not tonight. She huffed and turned back to the stove, muttering something under her breath about me being spineless. The insult rolled off me like water. I'd heard it before. I walked out of the kitchen, past the smell of marinara and the stack of unopened Christmas cards on the counter, and into the living room. Zoe had arranged the little wooden family from her dollhouse in front of the television. The father figure was positioned closest to the couch, like he was protecting the others. Movie time? I asked, settling down beside her. She grinned and burrowed under my arm with her favorite blanket, the one with the faded unicorns that she'd had since she was 7. "Can we watch It's a Wonderful Life? I know it's old, but I like the angel." "Yeah, kiddo, we can do that." She curled up against my shoulder, her hair smelling like the strawberry shampoo she insisted on using. On the screen, George Bailey's whole life played out in front of him, all the small sacrifices and quiet moments that nobody else seemed to notice or value. I watched, but I was thinking about how many times I'd said no to opportunities, because I thought we were building something together. How many evenings I'd spent in this house, fixing broken things and believing it mattered. Halfway through the movie, during the scene where George realizes his life has meaning, Zoe fell asleep against my chest. I carried her to bed, tucked the quilt up under her chin, and stood there for a moment listening to her steady breathing. Her room was exactly the way a 12-year-old's room should be. Half little girl with stuffed animals on the shelves, half teenager with boy band posters on the walls. Downstairs, the house felt different, empty somehow, even with Beverly moving around in the kitchen and the television still murmuring. I sat at the kitchen table, pulled my laptop toward me, and opened the email from Kobe that I'd been avoiding. The offer was still there. Quality Inspector Supervisor, Yamamoto Industries, aircraft parts manufacturing for the international market. Salary that was nearly double what I made here, plus housing allowance, plus the chance to learn something new in a place where nobody knew my history. "Hi, Kenji," I typed, my fingers moving before I could second-guess myself. "If the position is still available, I'd like to accept. I can be there within 2 weeks." The cursor blinked at the end of the sentence like a tiny heartbeat. I read it twice, heard my father's voice telling me about knowing my worth, and hit send. The little whoosh of the email disappearing into cyberspace sounded louder than it should have in that small kitchen. Final. Irrevocable. I didn't pack that night. I didn't leave a note. I just sat there for a while, listening to the familiar sounds of home, the furnace cycling on, the ice maker dropping cubes into the tray, the old house settling into itself, the ordinary noises of a life that was about to change completely. I didn't know it yet, but that quiet click of the send button was the first step toward the day Beverly would stand in front of a judge, red-faced and furious, while the truth finally caught up with her. When the plane touched down at Kansai International Airport 6 days later, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Quiet, not peace exactly, more like the quiet after a thunderstorm, when the air still smells like rain, and you're not entirely sure if it's really over. Kobe was bright even at night, full of neon lights and motion, but none of it belonged to me. The company had arranged a small apartment in a residential district, the kind of place where businessmen in identical dark suits hurried past with black umbrellas, even when it wasn't raining. My new home was efficient and sparse. A tiny kitchen with 2 burners, a narrow bed that folded against the wall, and a window looking out onto a street where vending machines glowed like beacons every 20 feet. The next morning, I walked to the plant with Kenji, my supervisor. He was a tall, soft-spoken man in his 50s, with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses that he constantly adjusted. He bowed slightly when he introduced me to the crew, a gesture of respect that felt foreign but genuine. They bowed back, simple courtesy, automatic and sincere, no strings attached. "People here work hard," Kenji said as we put on our safety gear and hairnets. "But we also take care of each other. Americans sometimes think Japanese workplace is all pressure, but respect is most important thing. You'll fit in." I nodded, but the truth was I felt like a ghost drifting through someone else's life. Everything was familiar enough. Aircraft parts, quality specifications, precision measurements, but wrapped in a language and culture I was still learning to navigate. During my first week, I kept checking my phone compulsively. There were no messages from Beverly, which didn't surprise me. She could go weeks without acknowledging my existence if it suited her mood. But Zoe, I kept waiting for something. A text asking how I was. A photo of something funny she'd seen. A question about homework or friends. Anything that would tell me I still mattered in her world. So, I sent the first message. "Hey kiddo, hope you're having a great time at the cabin. I'm in Japan now, learning to use chopsticks properly. Miss you tons." No reply. I tried again the next day, then the day after that. "Sent you a little gift from Kobe, should arrive next week. It's nothing big, just something that made me think of you." Still nothing. The silence stretched on like a physical weight. Every evening, I'd sit in my compact apartment with a convenience store dinner and scroll through my phone, hoping for the notification that never came. The rational part of my mind understood that she was probably busy, caught up in the excitement of snow and a big cabin and time with her biological father, but the irrational part whispered darker thoughts. Maybe she was relieved I was gone. Maybe Beverly had been right about what she needed. A few nights after my second week, I bought a small charm from the convenience store near my apartment, a wooden fox, a traditional symbol of protection and wisdom. The elderly woman behind the counter smiled when she saw my choice and said something in Japanese that sounded approving. I boxed it carefully with a note explaining the symbolism and mailed it to Zoe's address in Tacoma. The shipping cost more than the gift itself, but I didn't care. Walking back through the quiet streets, I passed a family, father, mother, and daughter about Zoe's age, laughing as they shared a bag of hot roasted chestnuts from a street vendor. The girl held both parents' hands and jumped over every crack in the sidewalk, while they pretended to be annoyed by her game. I stopped for a moment, watching them disappear around the corner into the maze of narrow streets. That's when the guilt hit me, the heavy, crushing kind that sits on your chest like someone pressing their full weight against you. Had I abandoned Zoe? Had I really been any better than Dante, disappearing when things got complicated? The questions circled in my mind like vultures, picking apart every decision I'd made. One Saturday, I met Daisuke for ramen. He was a younger coworker, maybe 28, with an easy smile and patient way of correcting my attempts at Japanese. He noticed me checking my phone for the dozenth time in an hour. Waiting for someone important? He asked, slurping his noodles with the proper appreciative noise. I hesitated, then decided honesty was easier than pretense. My daughter, my stepdaughter. It's complicated. He nodded thoughtfully. Family always is. In Japan, we say nana korobi ya oki, fall 7 times, get up 8. Sometimes distance helps us see what matters most. What if what matters most is back home, and I'm here eating noodles while everything falls apart? Daisuke set down his chopsticks and looked at me with the same quiet patience I'd seen throughout the plant. Truth always shows itself, he said simply. Maybe you are here so you can see it clearly when it does. I didn't know how prophetic those words would be. The revelation came the following Tuesday, while I was sitting on my apartment's tiny, balcony-eating convenience store soba and trying to make sense of the day's production reports. I'd opened Facebook for the first time in weeks, something I rarely did even back home. Social media felt like watching other people's highlight reels when your own life was stuck in editing. At the top of my feed was a post from Janet Morrison, a neighbor from our street in Tacoma, a photo that made my stomach drop and my blood run cold. Beverly and Zoe standing in front of a massive log cabin, snow-covered mountains in the background. Beverly wore the red cashmere sweater I'd bought her last Christmas, the expensive one she claimed to love. And next to them stood Dante Crawford, her ex-husband, looking handsome and relaxed in what I immediately recognized as my old Christmas sweater, the green one with the stitched pine tree that Zoe had always said looked happy. They looked like a perfect family, picture perfect, magazine cover perfect. Family Christmas at the cabin, the caption read, followed by 2 red heart emojis. I stared at that image until my food went completely cold, until the noodles congealed into an unappetizing mass. This wasn't just about Zoe spending time with her biological father. This was about replacement. Beverly stepping seamlessly into the life she'd always wanted, complete with the man she'd never really gotten over. I zoomed in on the picture, studying every detail with the kind of desperate attention you give to evidence of your worst fears. That's when the second punch hit, harder than the first. Zoe wasn't smiling. Not really. Not the crinkly-eyed, gap-toothed grin she gave me when she was genuinely happy. She looked confused, maybe even a little lost, like a kid who'd been told to stand still for a picture she didn't understand. That expression did something to me, broke something and fixed something all at once. The guilt that had been eating at me for weeks transformed into something sharper, cleaner. Purpose. But the worst revelation was still coming. 2 days later, I was in the plant break room, sharing coffee and rice balls with Daisuke when he walked in holding his phone with an expression I'd never seen before, concern mixed with something that looked like anger. "Nate," he said carefully, "is your last name Caldwell?" "Yeah," I said slowly, setting down my coffee cup. He turned his screen toward me without a word. He'd found a legal notice posted on Pierce County's public website, the kind of filing that anyone can access if they know where to look. Divorce petition. Filed by Beverly Ann Caldwell. Reason: abandonment and desertion. Date filed: December 26th. 3 days after I'd left for Japan. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out my lungs with a spoon. "She's claiming you left with no intention to return," Daisuke said gently, reading from the screen, "and that the house and all marital assets should be awarded to her due to abandonment." I stared at the legal language, the cold, bureaucratic, words that reduced 5 years of marriage to a checkbox on a form. She knew I was taking the job. She'd watched me send the email. She'd practically pushed me toward the door with her ultimatum. "Sometimes people choose lies when truth is inconvenient," Daisuke said, echoing something his grandmother used to tell him. I sank into the plastic break room chair, feeling like I was falling through space. She wasn't just happy without me. She was systematically erasing me from their lives, legally and financially. That evening, I checked my email obsessively. Still nothing from Zoe, nothing from anyone. But my phone buzzed with a notification from the package tracking app. The wooden fox charm I'd mailed had been delivered to the house 4 days ago. No acknowledgement, no thank you, nothing. Of course. Beverly must have intercepted it, probably threw it away without ever mentioning it to Zoe. I felt anger then, for the first time since this whole mess started. Not the hot, explosive kind that makes you do stupid things, but the cold, calculating kind that settles in your bones and gives you clarity. She had played me perfectly, maneuvered me into leaving, and then used my absence as a weapon against me. I looked out my apartment window at the narrow street below, watching businessmen hurry past in the eternal Japanese rain. Kobe hummed with activity, but inside me, a different kind of energy was building. I wasn't going back to Tacoma to salvage a marriage that was already dead. I was going back to save a 12-year-old girl who deserved the truth, and to make sure her mother finally faced the consequences of her choices. I booked my return flight that night. I landed at SeaTac on a bitter January morning when the wind off Puget Sound cut through everything. The airport felt smaller than I remembered, more provincial after 6 weeks in Japan. I took the shuttle to a budget motel near the Pierce County Courthouse, the kind of place where people stayed when they had business with lawyers and needed to count every dollar. My first stop was our credit union. Rosa Martinez, the teller who'd handled my accounts for years, did a double take when she saw me. "Nate, I thought you'd moved to Japan permanently." "Not quite," I said. "How's everything been?" She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Your wife came in here right after Christmas trying to drain your joint account. When we told her she needed your signature for withdrawals over $1,000, she threw a fit, demanded to speak to the manager, then the regional director. We finally had to ask her to leave. What reason did she give? Said you'd abandoned the family and she needed emergency funds for household expenses. But you know our policies." Rosa printed out 3 months of account activity without me asking. Beverly had attempted to withdraw the entire balance, $9,500, on 4 separate occasions. Each attempt had been blocked by banking regulations requiring dual signatures. My next stop was Fred Meyer. Not because I needed groceries, but because I needed to hear what story she'd been telling around town. Small cities are echo chambers, and I wanted to know what tune Beverly had been playing. I didn't have to wait long. In the produce section, I overheard 2 women I recognized from the neighborhood. Heard he ran off with some Japanese woman. Poor Beverly, stuck with all those bills. She always did have terrible luck with men. I rounded the corner and nearly collided with Maya Rodriguez, a cashier who'd rung up my groceries countless times over the years. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Holy shit, Nate, so she was lying." I managed a tired smile. "What exactly was she saying?" "That you'd cleaned out the bank account and skipped town with a woman half your age, left her and Zoe with nothing but debt and a mortgage she couldn't afford." Maya shook her head disgustedly. "Never sounded right to me. You're not the type." "Thanks, Maya. That means more than you know." "She's going to lose her mind when word gets out you're back," she warned. "Be careful." Over the next 3 days, I methodically built my case like I was assembling a precision aircraft part. Bank records, email timestamps, tracking confirmations for the package to Zoe, screenshots of job correspondence dating back months. Every piece of evidence that proved Beverly's abandonment claim was a deliberate lie. Eddie Torres, my lawyer and old high school friend, spread the documents across his desk and whistled low. "She really stepped in it," he said. "Filing abandonment 3 days after you left for a documented job transfer, attempting to liquidate assets without authorization, blocking parental contact. Judge Helen Garrett is going to tear her apart. Will it be enough to protect Zoe? More than enough. This shows a pattern of manipulation and deception. Plus, Zoe's old enough that her preferences will carry weight." The hearing was set for February 15th. Beverly's attorney clearly expected me to be a no-show, an absent defendant they could railroad in absentia. Instead, I walked into that courthouse with a binder full of truth and watched Beverly's face go white when she saw me sitting at the respondent's table. Justice, it turns out, sometimes does wear work boots and carry a lunch pail. The courtroom was packed when Judge Helen Garrett called our case. Beverly sat rigid in her red coat, confident until she saw me. Her lawyer's smug expression cracked when I stood with my binder of evidence. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge said, adjusting her glasses, "I wasn't expecting you. The filing claimed you'd abandoned your family overseas." "No, Your Honor. I accepted a job transfer after my wife told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas because my stepdaughter needed her real father." Beverly's face flushed. "That's not—" "Mrs. Caldwell, you'll have your turn." Judge Garrett studied my evidence. Bank records showing Beverly's attempts to drain our account. Email. Timestamps proving the job was planned, not impulsive. Tracking confirmations for gifts she'd intercepted. "Your Honor," I continued, "she filed abandonment 3 days after I left for documented employment. She tried to liquidate assets without authorization and blocked my contact with Zoe." Maya Rodriguez testified from the witness stand about Beverly's lies around town. Eddie Torres presented the timeline that destroyed Beverly's credibility completely. Judge Garrett's ruling was swift. "Mrs. Caldwell, your pattern of deception is deeply concerning. Temporary custody goes to Mr. Caldwell. You will repay improperly withdrawn funds and cease all attempts to sell marital property." Beverly stormed out, red-faced and defeated. Then I heard it. "Dad?" Zoe stood in the doorway with Mrs. Palmer, her school counselor. She ran to me, wrapping her arms around my waist. "I knew you didn't leave me," she whispered against my shirt. I held her tight, one hand on her head, while the courtroom emptied around us. This hug was everything. Vindication, reunion, home. Sometimes real fathers are the ones who stay. Sometimes truth wins out over manipulation. And sometimes, if you're patient enough, dignity defeats deception. If you've ever been told you weren't real to someone you love, remember this. Showing up matters more than showing off.